How will Trump's first 100 days as president unfold? Yeah, I know, I'm talking about Trump again, but this video is full of important info and I promise you'll walk away from it feeling more informed. Stay with me here. A president's first 100 days in office are widely regarded as a key benchmark for their presidency. It has been this way since Franklin Delano Roosevelt first addressed the nation about his first 100 days in a radio address in 1933. Since that point, new presidents have often used the first 100 days framework to highlight their priorities and demonstrate how they plan to move forward in their administration. Now, if you somehow haven't heard by now, Donald Trump will be back in the White House on January 20th. I don't know how you wouldn't have heard unless you were somehow entirely off the grid or living under a rock for the last month, but hey, maybe that applies to some of you. Perhaps an even more important development than Trump winning though is the fact that Republicans managed to both flip the Senate and maintain control of the House, which basically means that Democrats will have much greater difficulty preventing any major changes that Trump may want to make to the way things are currently running. In all likelihood, Trump should be able to pass quite a bit through the Congress he'll have for the first 2 years of his presidency. But where exactly will his priorities lie? In today's video, I'm going to run through everything Trump plans on addressing during his first 100 days in office. Everything from immigration to the economy to government changes and much more. There's a lot to cover, so why don't we just jump straight into it? Here we go. To better understand how Trump may enact major policy changes in his first 100 days of office, we first need to understand how he may shake things up in the federal government as a whole. He's already made quite a few nominations for cabinet positions, but not all of them really apply for this video. If you want to read more about them, check out my sources down below. Anyways, making all of the big changes Trump wants to make wouldn't be easy. He would likely face some pretty big challenges in getting stuff done. To make things a bit easier, some of Trump's closest allies have been preparing a series of executive orders for Trump to put in place once he gets into office. Arguably the biggest executive order they prepared, and the one that could set a lot of Trump's plans into motion, is for Trump to reimpose his Schedule F executive order, which would reclassify a large chunk of federal staff members as at-will employees. By doing this, Trump would pave the way for federal civil service workers to be replaced, likely by political allies who are more invested in carrying out his policies. There will probably be challenges to these moves in the courts by groups like the ACLU, so we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. What other moves does Trump plan to make in the federal government though? Well, this feels like a good time to talk about the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE for short, which is something that was made up by Trump. Trump appointed Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy as heads of DOGE, and pretty much the entire goal of their department is to cut federal spending. Musk himself has said that he wants to slash federal spending by a third, while Ramaswamy has said he wants to cut the federal workforce down by 75%. While these goals likely wouldn't be accomplished in Trump's first 100 days, they'd at least be put into motion. So how would all of that work? DOGE will be an outside department that will work in conjunction with the Office of Management and Budget, a White House office in charge of helping the sitting president craft budget proposals to bring to Congress. A former Trump administration official told Al Jazeera, quote, "From everything we've heard now, what Elon and Vivek are proposing to do would be something similar to what the Office of Management and Budget and GAO, Government Accountability Office, does. OMB serves the president specifically to help manage federal agencies across the executive branch. Anything that goes to the president has to go through OMB first. Anything that comes from the president to other agencies has to go through OMB first. So in terms of changes to the federal government, expect Trump to try and scale down its spending and reach significantly, as well as replacing federal workers with loyalists via executive orders. There will be court challenges, but if Trump gets his way, we could be looking at a very different federal government soon. With that in mind, let's get into immigration. This will likely be a fairly quick section, as there's really only two big changes that Trump wants to make in regards to immigration, and that's securing the border and beginning the largest deportation program in American history. In fact, Trump has made this a top priority for when he re-enters office, and has said that this deportation program will begin on the first day that he is back. But what would this look like? It would begin with Trump declaring a national emergency so that he would be able to carry out these mass deportations using the US military. According to Axios, these planned deportations could affect as many as 11 million undocumented migrants, and in turn impact nearly 20 million families across the country. After declaring a national emergency, the new administration will first target any undocumented immigrants who pose a potential security or criminal risk. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance said himself that the administration would, quote, start with 1 million, beginning with, quote, the most violent criminals. After that, though, it's expected that Trump would broaden the scope of those being targeted for deportation. To help the cause, the state of Texas has offered Trump thousands of acres of land to build deportation facilities. According According to The Guardian, quote, the Texas Land Commissioner Don Buckingham wrote in a letter to Trump that our office is fully prepared to enter into an agreement with the Department of Homeland Security, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, or the U.S. Border Patrol to allow a facility to be built for the processing, detention, and coordination of the largest deportation of violent criminals in the nation's history. Like I just said, the crackdown on immigration has a good chance of starting on day one. However, that will obviously come with logistical challenges. It won't be easy to amass the resources to carry out large-scale deportations, nor will it be easy to convince foreign countries to take back their citizens. It will also be intriguing to see how public opinion on the matter changes if these deportations are carried out on as large of a scale as Trump wants. The impacts of something like this would be pretty staggering on the economic side of things as well. According to Foreign Policy, undocumented immigrants comprise a major labor force in the United States, especially in the agricultural sector, where they've made up around 40% of the farm labor force over the last 3 decades. These are usually lower wage jobs that the vast majority of American voters say that they do not want to work. To add to that, deporting a person is generally pretty expensive as well. The American Immigration Council has estimated that removing all 13.3 million people who are either in the United States illegally or under some sort of revocable temporary status would require nearly $1 trillion over about 10 years. Finally, it should be noted that undocumented immigrants contribute to the US economy by paying taxes. In 2022, undocumented immigrants contributed approximately $96.7 billion in federal, state, and local taxes, with the bulk of these funds being allocated to the federal government. According to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, this isn't me trying to argue the immigration debate one way or another. It's obviously a very complex issue and there's a lot that goes into it. I'm simply trying to explain what sort of impacts we could see in the US if Trump goes through with his current immigration policy. But how else might the economy be impacted? Let's now transition away from immigration and talk about some of Trump's first economic changes. There are 2 main areas that it seems like Trump is going to be focusing on first when it comes to the economy: tariffs and tax cuts. To keep things simple, let's start with tariffs and what Trump wants to do with them. For those of you who don't know, tariffs are basically just taxes that are placed on imports from another country. More specifically, a tariff is a tax imposed on foreign-made goods paid by the importing business to its home country's government. Generally speaking, the United States has tariffs in place on a decent chunk of goods that enter the country. However, Trump has announced he plans to take this up a notch, specifically in regards to goods coming from China, Canada, and Mexico, as well as countries attempting to challenge the US dollar. In one Truth Social post, Trump wrote that he wants to put a blanket 25% tariff in place on all products coming into the United States from both Mexico and Canada, writing that, quote, this tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily solve this long simmering problem. We hereby demand that they use this power, and until such time that they do, it is time for them to pay a very big price. In another post, Trump said he would target China with tariffs, claiming he would place, quote, an additional 10% tariff above any additional tariffs on all of their many products coming into the United States of America, due to the mass amounts of fentanyl being sent to the United States from China through Mexico. And finally, just recently, Trump said that he would impose 100% tariffs on any country trying to replace the US dollar and create a new BRICS currency. More specifically, Trump wrote that if these countries move forward with any plans, they, quote, should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy. For reference, the main BRICS countries are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Judging by these posts, it's very possible that Trump is using these tariffs as more of a negotiating tactic rather than actually planning to implement them. However, let's say that these countries don't budge and Trump has his bluff called. In that case, it's possible that the American consumer would be negatively impacted. Several estimates on how the US's economy would be impacted show that the country's overall GDP would shrink by varying amounts if Trump's 10% universal tariff, an idea that he has said he wants to implement, goes into effect. If we include Trump's idea of a 60% universal tariff on goods from China, the estimated shrinkage of the US's GDP is only amplified. But enough about tariffs, let's move on to taxes. Trump campaigned on a variety of tax-related promises, such as getting rid of taxes on tips, as well as making the tax cuts from his first presidency permanent. In terms of getting rid of taxes on tips, it's very possible that we could see something from Trump's administration regarding this within his first 100 days. However, a larger reconciliation bill addressing tax cuts across the board may have to wait until the fiscal year 2026. It's likely that Trump will spend more of his focus early on elsewhere, both in terms of the economy and otherwise. Speaking of, why don't we move on to another area that Trump may target for change early on in his presidency? It's time to talk about the environment, or more specifically, what environmental regulations may be reversed early on in Trump's term. Let's get into it. Trump's 2024 campaign was built on, at least in part, appealing to the US oil and gas industry. The term drill baby drill is something that Trump echoed a lot while campaigning, including in his speech at the 2024 Republican National Convention. This phrase, of course, refers to fracking. Trump has promised that expanding fracking will be a key component of the first few months of his presidency. In fact, Trump has vowed to prioritize expanded fracking and increased oil production on his first day in office. Fracking has become a pivotal issue in Pennsylvania, a state that Trump narrowly won. So how would he accomplish this? Lucky for us, it's already been laid out. In a memo to his House colleagues, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise wrote that a key priority would be to, quote, unleash American energy by requiring lease sales as well as opening federal lands for, quote, increased energy exploration and production. For reference, federal lands include everything from national parks to wildlife refuges and conservation areas to military reservations and national battlefields. Scalise also called for rolling back environmental provisions from Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. These provisions laid out in the Inflation Reduction Act include, most notably, emission standards set by the Environmental Protection Agency. Scalise isn't the only person to describe this plan either. Way back in July of 2024, during an interview with Bloomberg, fracking services executive Chris Wright suggested that the Trump administration was planning to expand drilling on federal lands and make it easier to permit infrastructure. Why is Chris Wright, some random fracking executive, important? He's the guy that Trump has tapped to lead the Department of Energy, which means his words are pretty significant overall. Another thing to note, Trump's campaign has already said that Trump will pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Accords when he takes office again. He previously pulled the US out of the agreement during his first presidency, while Joe Biden put the US back into it. However, Trump may be planning to go even further. Several draft executive orders for withdrawing the US from the Climate Accord are already prepared for Trump to consider signing, according to Politico. One version includes a proposal to withdraw the United States from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, also known as the UNFCCC. The UNFCCC serves as the foundational treaty for global climate negotiations. If Trump pursues this approach and exits the 1992 UN treaty itself, it could complicate future US participation, potentially requiring Senate approval to rejoin and leaving the country excluded from the system indefinitely. Look, overall, Trump made a promise to unleash American energy if he were to be elected president again. While his long-term plan isn't as clear, Trump's environmental plan for the first 100 days is a simple one, where domestic energy production is a priority and things like climate change take a back seat. That's pretty much the bottom line. So with all of that in mind, let's now make a pretty drastic pivot into the world of foreign affairs. Much like I have in previous videos on this channel, this portion of Trump's foreign policy will be divided up into three separate categories: the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, and China. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, Trump has promised peace. He also previously said on the campaign trail he could end the war in Ukraine, quote, in a day. While that could be chalked up to Trump speak, what exactly would his steps to secure peace between Ukraine and Russia look like? To be honest, there aren't any concrete answers, as Trump has yet to go into specifics on how he would get the two sides to strike a deal. However, it's very likely that he would take steps to do so during the first 100 days of his presidency. One report from Reuters claims that advisors to Donald Trump are suggesting proposals to end the war that include ceding significant portions of Ukraine to Russia for the foreseeable future. The report also says that, quote, Trump's advisors would try forcing Moscow and Kiev into negotiations with carrots and sticks, including halting military aid to Kiev if it agrees to talk, but boosting assistance if Russian President Vladimir Putin refuses. If true, these negotiation tactics will likely be seen during Trump's first 100 days as president. While discussing Ukraine and Russia, we should also touch on NATO. All of the proposals being suggested to Donald Trump allegedly say that a NATO membership for Ukraine should be taken off the table. However, many European countries would be likely to push back on that and would ramp up their aid in the event of the US no longer sending aid to Ukraine. Let's now transition over to the Middle East and learn a bit about Trump's plans for the war between Israel and Hamas. As far as we know, Trump isn't very pressed to get a peace deal done here. All signs kind of point to the United States continuing to send aid to Israel. In fact, just recently in a post on Truth Social, Trump wrote, quote, if the hostages are not released prior to January 20th, 2025, the date that I proudly assume office as President of the United States, there will be all hell to pay in the Middle East, and for those in charge who perpetrated these atrocities against humanity. This could indicate a ramping up of US involvement in the war once Trump takes office, though it's hard to tell at this point. Finally, let's move to China, where, aside from potential tariffs, there probably isn't too much Trump would be able to accomplish with them in his first 100 days of office. The geopolitical situation with China China is far too complex to solve in that short amount of time, so we just have to wait and see what happens here. It's far more likely Trump will spend his early days of foreign policy trying to find peace in Ukraine and help Israel in the Middle East. That's about it when it comes to foreign policy, but there are also lots of changes Trump will probably try to make that don't fit into the three categories I just covered. So let's take a couple minutes now to review all of those. This section is going to be a little bit all over the place. Think of it as a quickfire round of sorts. Here we go. To start, Trump plans to pardon many of those who stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021. He hasn't said he'd pardon all of them, as he previously said that a few probably got out of control. However, he has said that if he deems them innocent, he will pardon them. On a totally unrelated note, Donald Trump has also pledged to reverse President Biden's change to Title X, the nation's sole federally funded family planning program. During his first term in 2019, Trump's administration introduced a rule barring health providers within the Title X network from discussing abortions with patients, even if the patient initiated the conversation. This policy led to the loss of tens of millions of dollars in funding for organizations like Planned Parenthood. Biden reversed the rule shortly after taking office in 2021, but Trump is expected to reinstate the restrictions when he returns to power. While we're at it, now feels like a good time to briefly touch on Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Trump has nominated him to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services. If he is confirmed, RFK Jr. seems to have quite a few big changes he'd want to make. For starters, he tweeted that on January 20th, once Trump is in office, quote, "The Trump White House will advise all U.S. water systems to remove fluoride from public water." He has also taken aim at food additives and things like seed oils, which could be a target of increased scrutiny during Trump's presidency. On the subject of vaccines, RFK Jr. has insisted that he's, quote, "not going to take away anybody's vaccines." Like much of what I've said in this video, we'll just have to wait and see what comes of that. For now though, it's time to wrap things up. In all likelihood, we will see some major changes once Trump takes office again on January 20th, 2025. However, there's a chance the timing of some of these changes could get messed with a bit. Congress is currently facing a December 20th deadline to avert a government shutdown. It's likely that Democrats and Republicans will come together to pass a temporary short-term funding bill that will keep the government's doors open through March of 2025. However, after that, who knows what may happen. Another quick note, while Republicans do control both the House and the Senate, their majorities are slim, especially in the House. It is possible that with some infighting between Republicans, Trump may struggle to get some of his agenda passed. We'll have to see whether Republicans can get aligned together given that they now have control over the House and the Senate. Anyways, that's all I've got for today. Sorry for the delay on this video. It took me a while to get everything put together, and I also took a few days off for the holidays. If you enjoyed it or found this video informative, please feel free to like and subscribe. More videos coming soon. I know I said this a few times throughout this video, but if you're interested in learning more about this topic, all of my sources are linked down below. I'd highly recommend you check them out if you're interested. Thanks so much for watching and for all your continued support. I really appreciate it. Hope I see you next time. Take care.